Most of us suffer from some kind of inner criticism or self-judgment. And in traditional Western psychology, Sigmund Freud called it the superego. And a lot of Western psychology looks at it as if it's a part of ourself that we just need to learn to cope with or deal with. And we kind of battle with it or ignore it or negotiate it. And that is not my experience. My experience is that the inner self-criticism is an old defensive structure or protective device or coping skill that needs to either be updated or dissolved completely. And the process that we're going to do today is incredibly effective at both of those things, dissolving and transforming. And it's based on an ancient Buddhist practice started in the 11th century by a female yogini named Machig Labdrung. And it was brought into the modern world by a modern female Lama, Lama Tsultrim Allione, who has a wonderful ashram in Colorado called Tara Mandala. And she has modernized this process and calls it feeding your demons. And it's one of the most profound and transformative processes I've come across, and I've added it into my work since I discovered it, because it is not only gentle and really transformative, but it's also a very compassionate approach to inner negativity. And so it's a more feminine way of approaching what Lama Tsultrim calls our inner demons. And in a lot of Western psychology and Western mythology, we tend to approach negativity from a more masculine, almost violent standpoint, where we're fighting it. We had a war on drugs for years, and we're incarcerating people. And if you watch movies, if anybody's a bad guy, they kill them. And the problem with that is that on the highest levels of consciousness, we're all connected. And when we harm anything on some level, we harm ourselves. And so the beauty of this process is that we're actually looking for the deepest needs that are underlying the dysfunction. And it's a very compassionate way to understand intentional negativity, is that underneath it, almost everything is rooted in suffering that is dysfunctional. And we can shame and blame and try to kill it or cut it off, but it's actually much more beneficial for the entire system when we look at what the deepest needs are driving the dysfunction or the suffering, and fill those needs. And hey, Livia, nice to have you here. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to get a visceral or more form or concrete sense of the inner critic within ourselves, using our own active imagination, our more intuitive or body-centered ways of knowing. And once something takes a form in our consciousness, then we can work with it in really direct and powerful ways. And so we're going to get a sense of this inner critic, and we're actually going to be able to personify it and let it answer some questions for us. And with those questions, we're going to be able to feed the deeper needs that are driving it, and either dissolve it completely or transform it into a new, more updated operating system. Because from my experience, the inner critic usually is part of an operating system. If we look deeply at it, even the most destructive, even murderous forms, which the inner critic can be anything from a mild annoyance to actually causing people to harm themselves or even kill themselves. It's a huge range. That destructive force, if we look deeply at it, is usually rooted in some dysfunctional attempt to stay safe, or to try to actually avoid criticism or getting in trouble or some kind of shame or blame or pain. And as in a lot of dysfunction in our life, the way that we try to avoid suffering sometimes causes more suffering than the original suffering itself. I know that for myself as an ex-addict. My addictions, of which there were many, caused me much more suffering than the actual authentic feelings that I was trying to avoid. So, does anybody have any questions so far? This is an experiential practice. So thanks so much for all the love, who's ever sending hearts. This is an experiential practice. So I think it's good to spend time actually doing the work more than talking about it. So does anybody have any questions or comments about their own inner critic? We're going to do a little bit of body-centered mindfulness and get a sense of how you feel or imagine or sense or experience that inner critic or inner judge within yourself. For some people, it's verbal. For some people, it's more of an emotional or body-centered experience. It's different for everyone. And like I said, then we're going to kind of personify it, and then we're going to work with it to do what I call an internal operating system update. This is an update to our own inner iOS. Hey, Jessica, great to have you. And a lot of times these internal defensive structures or protective mechanisms that kind of turn rogue and become destructive are things that may have really worked for us back in 2003 or 2012 or 1991, whenever they were formed, often when we were kids. But it's kind of like having, if you grew up in Chicago and then you moved to Dallas and trying to use a map of Chicago to navigate your way around Dallas, you're going to get lost. And so even the idea of if you have a laptop with Windows 6 and you're trying to run modern programming on it, it won't work very well. So we're going to update our internal protective or defensive structures into a more appropriate, constructive, supportive system that that's updated for where we are in our life today. So, any questions or comments before we start? Otherwise, we're going to jump right in. Okay. So, if you have questions or comments, excellent, Livia, I'm glad. So if you have any questions or comments as we go along, I always keep my eyes on the comments. As I do with most of these inner journeys, I try to structure it as openly as possible for you to have your own unique and authentic experience, and for your own psyche and your own inner wisdom to present what most wants to be presented to you. So I mostly ask questions. And it's up to you to just see what the answers are that resonate with those questions. And again, you need to follow your own inner guidance first. I'm just a navigator providing a general direction. And so if something else comes up for you, follow your own inner wisdom first. But if you want to answer the questions that I ask in the comments, it can be really helpful and interactive for the other participants to be able to see and hear what other people are experiencing. And so I generally will read the comments if people are willing to post in them. Now, if you want to just interact with me, I'm happy to support you in your process. I find it quite effective to actually do that on Insight Timer. And so if you don't want me to share, but you want to share with me what's happening, just say don't share and type in your thing. And I can still talk to you, but I won't share your experience. I don't know if that makes sense, but anyway, I'm here as your teacher. I'm here to support you both as a group and individually. So whatever you need, put it in the comments and I'll do the best I can to help you dissolve the inner critic and update your own internal operating system into a more constructive, productive way of being. And so let's get started. Take a moment and just get comfortable. You can sit or lie down. And take a moment to just get present. If you're in a space that is on the cooler side, you might want to get a blanket because often the body temperature will drop. Hey, Mo, great to see you. So often the body temperature will drop. And so just allow yourself to get settled. If you tend to fall asleep, you might not want to lie down. You might want to sit up and see how that goes. Part of this practice, somebody knows that was for them. Part of this practice is learning to navigate our own internal, more intuitive ways of experiencing and feeling. And just being present with this process in itself is an expanding, growing experience. So whatever happens, welcome, and I'm glad that you're here. So taking a moment and just noticing maybe any tightness or tension in your body, and perhaps drawing a long, slow in-breath into any tightness or tension, and maybe releasing that on your exhale. Might want to roll your shoulders, perhaps slacken your jaw. Maybe flex your hands and feet. And just coming a little deeper into your body, into the present moment, into your inner world. Knowing it's safe to do that. And if you have any grounding or spiritual practice that includes throwing down roots or connecting with guides or teachers, ancestors, angels, rays, just taking a moment and making those connections. Just connecting with your own best self in present time. You might want to take a moment and gently close your eyes if that feels comfortable for you. And maybe take a moment and give your conscious mind permission to take a well-deserved rest, that you'll be able to be curious and open and observe what's happening, but that we'll think about it and we'll make sense of it later. We're going to open to our more non-rational, body-centered, intuitive ways of knowing. And it doesn't have to make any sense. Body has its own wisdom, the psyche, our intuition, our own spirit and energy system. And it's helpful if the rational mind just notices and observes those other ways of knowing that hold insight and information and the possibility of transformation and healing that the conscious rational mind doesn't have access to. And so I wonder if you can sense or feel or imagine where this inner critic or inner judge that wants to be transformed today, where does it live in your body? How do you experience the inner critic or the inner judge? We're just going to be curious about it for right now. It doesn't get to take over, but we want to notice it. So it might be a voice in your head. It might be a sensation in your throat or your chest. It might be a tightness in your belly. It might be like a pressure on your shoulders, or a squeezing or a fogginess in your mind. And so where does the inner critic live in your body? It doesn't have to make any sense, just whatever comes up. Again, we're just going to be open and curious that whatever happens is the information that our own psyche and inner wisdom wants to present to us right now. just observing and being curious. If it's a voice, you might notice where it's located in your head. Is it more on the left or the right, or the front or the back? And if it's a sensation in your body, same thing. Is it more on the right or the left? Is it more on the outside or is it right in your core? Just being curious, we're just gathering information. Where does the inner critic live in your body? And if you want to drop it in the comments, you're welcome to do that. If you want to just keep it to yourself, if that helps you stay more grounded, do what works best for you. This is your process. And once you get a sense of where the inner critic lives in your body, your head or your chest or your belly, I wonder if you can sense or imagine or feel if it had a color. What color would it be? Or shape? Or density? Would it be like a jelly or a liquid or a solid or a gas? Just whatever comes up. Again, it doesn't have to make any sense. We'll make sense of it later. Just being curious, opening to our more non-rational, intuitive ways of knowing. If the inner critic had a color, a shape, a density, a texture, might be hard or fluffy or spiky or smoky. And does it have a temperature? Might be neutral, cold, hot, icy. Just being curious as we begin to bring form to the formless. Once you can sense or feel or imagine some sense of a shape or a density, a color, an area, it might have an energy. And if more than one thing comes up, I would go with the one that's the strongest or the most presenting. We're just going to pick one at a time. So if you have something in your belly and something in your head, whichever one feels more intense, that's the one I would go for first. It's up to you. But I always like to go for the thing that's going to bring the most healing first. So knowing it's safe to do this. And I wonder if you can sense or feel or imagine that you can move this energy of this inner critic out of your body. It's in your head or your belly or your chest. Again, we're going to move this energy out of your body, and it personifies itself in the room with limbs and a head and face. Totally safe to do this. Doesn't need to make any sense. So if you have a hard, black, shiny, spiky ball in the right side of your head, we're going to move that out of your head, and it's going to personify itself in the room with limbs and a face and head. If you have a green gas in your chest, I'm going to move that out of your body. And just allow it to personify itself with our own active imagination, the bridge between our rational and non-rational worlds. And I wonder, what size is it? So we're moving this energy out of our body, allowing it to personify itself in the room with limbs and a head and face. And what size would it be? Might be tiny, might be huge, might be human size. Just whatever comes up. You might notice if it has a gender. It might not. Does it seem more male, more female, or neutral? And what is its character or personality like? Again, it's safe to do this. Just being curious and open. What is its character or personality? What's the look in its eyes? If it had eyes, what would the look in its eyes be? You might notice, what is the covering of its body? And maybe noticing if there's anything you hadn't noticed about it before. Anything that you haven't noticed about it before. So moving the inner critic or inner judge out of our body, personifies itself, and we're just allowing it to reveal its details in form. And you might sense, you might feel, or you might imagine these. We all have different ways of knowing and experiencing, gathering information. Steve says it's needy and desperate. It's abandoned. Okay. And so we want to ask some questions. And the first question is, what does it want? Jessica's has crossed arms in an aloof posture, turning its face away. Okay. So we want to ask, what do you want? We're just going to be open to what's coming. Olivia comes on herself as a child. Okay, so we're just going to keep going, dressed in a silver knight armor, crying and sobbing. So we want to ask, whatever has presented itself, what do you want? And it might present in words or telepathy or even behavior. It'll communicate what I want is, and it doesn't have to make any sense, just being open. What I want is, we're just going to be open, gathering information. It might want to keep us small, it might want to keep us safe. It might tell us that we're bad and it needs to fix us. What does it want? And it would answer, what I want is, again, we're just going to be open and curious. So Cynthia has already answered what's probably the next question. And Steve as well, because the next question is, what do you most deeply need? What is your deepest, most vulnerable need? And usually it is for something that's a high resonance, like attention, love, protection, acknowledgement, connection, safety. And so Cynthia's wants attention and love. Well, so Steve, we're just going to go, often this can be seen as a part of ourself, right? And so this is an abandoned, with Steve, it sounds like this is an abandoned part of yourself that has presented. We're just going to go with what comes up. And it wants help and protection. So we're just going to stay with that. Whatever the answers are, we're not going to get in our rational mind. We don't need a story or a narrative around it. We're just going to go with what comes. So we're going to ask what this inner critic most deeply needs, Elizabeth. And it may concur or be congruent with your own needs, or it might not. The inner critic sometimes presents like it did with, who was it? Somebody, it was a child, Olivia, as a child part of herself, but it may be something different. There's a lot of complexity about how these formations present with different people. So we're going to ask the inner critic, what do you most deeply need? And again, we're looking for high resonance. Its most vulnerable need, the love, connection, safety, acknowledgement, protection, attention, and we may even need to use a little bit of our own intuition to get a sense of what this entity most deeply needs. So Mike is to be accepted and celebrated, seen, and be significant. Beautiful. Olivia needs acknowledgement and emotional support. Gorgeous. Okay. And so once you get a sense, Jessica needs soothing and safety. Great. So we want to just go, Steve, with the deepest need. We're going to keep this as simple as possible. And just whatever comes up as the authentic need that is the antidote, love. Beautiful. Yep, we're going to keep it simple. The inner critic is a complicated defensive structure, and we're going to go right underneath it, right to the deepest need. And once you get a sense of what this deepest need is, Sunita is emotional support. Awesome. Yep. And once you can sense or feel, intuit or imagine, or once you hear the answer or establish that answer, what I most deeply need is, that's what this inner critic is communicating or presenting. I wonder if you can sense or feel or imagine that your own body dissolves into a nectar or an elixir that's the exact quality of what this entity most deeply needs. And this nectar or elixir moves toward it, and it can take it up or take it in. It might drink it or eat it. It might absorb through the covering of its body or pour over or into it. Doesn't need to make any sense. You might notice what the qualities of this nectar or elixir are. And if the dissolving feels disorienting, you can generate this nectar or elixir from your own body. The exact quality of what this entity most deeply needs. You might notice again, what is the qualities of that nectar or elixir? Does it have a color, a density, a flavor, a texture? Might be like a golden honey, a peach liquid, a clear or crystalline mountain spring water. What is the quality of this nectar or elixir that this entity most deeply needs? And how would it take it up or take it in? Cynthia's bright, light, sweetness, and sparkly. How would it take it up or take it in? Again, we're just observing and grounding this process. Doesn't need to make any sense. Again, it might eat it or drink it, absorb it, bathe in it, pour into the top of its head. And there's an infinite supply of exactly what it most deeply needs. And it can receive and receive and receive to its complete satisfaction. Love and acceptance, emotional support, soothing and safety, acknowledgement, being celebrated, seen, being significant, help and protection. There's an endless supply of this nectar or elixir, exactly what it most deeply needs. And it can receive physically and mentally, emotionally and spiritually, energetically and sexually, socially, creatively and professionally. On all levels, it's safe for it to receive and receive and receive exactly what it most deeply needs to its complete satisfaction, endless supply. We're just going to observe and ground this process. Doesn't need to make any sense. We don't need to have a story around it. We're just holding space, receiving and receiving and receiving exactly what it most deeply needs. Till it's completely satisfied. You might notice what happens as it receives in this way. As much as it needs, love, protection, safety, support. Eating, drinking, absorbing. And what happens as it receives what it most deeply needs? We're just going to be open and curious. Does it change shape, size, color, density, character, personality, how it feels? Might change in age or shape. Doesn't need to make any sense. Yep, just observing and grounding and being curious. We'll think about it later. And just allowing this nectar or elixir of love and safety, acceptance, acknowledgement, protection, connection, compassion to be received and received and received on all levels. Safe to do this. Beautiful. And so, just noticing, observing, taking all the time you need for this entity to receive and receive and receive until it's completely satisfied. And if it changes form, just continuing to allow it to change form. If it dissolves or becomes translucent, perhaps allowing it to dissolve or transluce completely. And once it is satisfied, once it has been fulfilled and received, and feels completely satiated, just noticing what remains. Again, it doesn't have to make any sense. If it has shifted into a part of yourself, you just be present with that part of yourself. If it has shifted into something different, or just had a change within itself, so if it was like a grumpy old man and it became a happier old man or a younger man, we want to ask, in this transformed, fulfilled state, is it a helper, or does it need to move on to the next place for its own evolution? Now, if it's a part of yourself, we are going to integrate it. And if it wants to leave, then the nectar can escort it to the next place for its own evolution. But it's been neutralized and transformed, so it's safer to move it in this way. So just allowing the nectar to move it along. If it has turned into a helper, and so for Mike, it has turned into an aspect of divine God. And for Cynthia, it has presented as part of herself, and Livia, an aspect of golden light and liquid made of her own happy self. So if it feels like something that is a helper, then we're going to ask it some questions. If it's an aspect of your own self, we're going to ask it some questions. But if it's something that needs to move on, just allow the nectar to move it along and to clear and cleanse the space. And we're just going to track it until it's out of your awareness. And nothing gets to live in our psychic space without our permission once we are consciously aware of it. So if you want this energy to go, then it has no choice. And the nectar will move it away. Once it's out of your awareness, if the transformed energy is a helper, we're going to be present and notice what its form is. Hello, Amira. Welcome. We want to notice what its form is. And if, like Elizabeth, it has moved on and now the space is clear, we want to ask for an ally or a helper to appear. A new operating system may come in whatever form is most helpful for us. It doesn't need to make any sense. It might come in the form of a creature or a wise being or a light or a color or an emanation of our own highest self, an element of nature, or any other form. We're just going to be open and curious and see what comes. So Elizabeth, you want to ask for an ally or a helper to appear. A productive, constructive, helpful energy. And just being open and curious to what presents itself. Maybe something familiar, maybe something new. And once the ally appears, we want to notice what its form is. And so whatever this new helpful form is, whether it is the transformed energy, an aspect of our own self, or something new that has presented, notice what its form is, and we want to ask it some questions. And the first question is, How will you help me? And this is including if it's an aspect of ourselves. How will you help me? So inspiration, it sounds like. Vesti. We're going to remain open and curious. How will you help me? And this may come in words or telepathy or some other kind of communication. Might be a felt experience. How will you help me? And the next question is, and this is including aspects of ourselves. If it's child aspect, and this question doesn't feel appropriate, let me know in the comments and I'll give you some other questions. But the second question for most of us is, how will you protect me? How will you protect me? And just being open and curious. What comes? And protection comes in many forms, sometimes even just being more whole and present adds to our own protection. How will you protect me? And the next question is, what vow or promise do you make to me? What vow or promise do you make to me? Maybe to always be available, to be ever present, to never leave, to be aware when you are not, to offer unconditional compassion or love, or being. Just being open and curious. What vow or promise do you make to me? To always be there when you call me. Protection of the Archangel Michael. Beautiful. I can feel that one. And the last question is, how can I connect with you? Maybe as simple as call my name. Close your eyes and be present. Think of me and be aware. Or there may be a ritual, a snap, a whistle, a hand clap, lighting of a candle, just being open. How can I connect with you? To pray. I want to check in with Elizabeth and Livia, maybe? People who this was an aspect of themselves. If these questions, okay, awesome. If these questions are working. Elizabeth, how's Elizabeth doing? Oh, Elizabeth, it wasn't a child pod, sorry. Excellent. Okay, Livia, great. So Now I wonder if you can sense or feel or imagine that this ally or helper or aspect of your own authentic self pours their energy into you. Notice where it leaves their form and where it enters your own. You might notice if their energy has a quality, a color, a light, a density that you can be aware of or not. Where does this energy leave their form and where does it enter your own? It might pour into the top of your head or your throat, your third eye, your heart, your palms, your belly. And opening to receive all that is good about them. Their strength, their protection, their insight, their presence, their love, their compassion, their wisdom, their guidance, their inspiration. Beautiful. Cynthia is receiving through her chest and heart. So just breathing in, Steve, and opening to receive. It's safe to do this. And I wonder if you can sense or imagine or feel that this energy flows all the way down to the soles of your feet. Out to the tips of your fingers and up to the crown of your head. So Jessica, you may want to query of what else wants to come. If there's an additional helper to come. Maybe something you've worked with before, it may be something new. Unless this helper doesn't want to do for you what you can do for yourself. That's a question. So Jessica, you might see how you feel about them. And if they feel like they have your highest good in mind. So Sunita's receiving from her third eye and crown. So receiving their energy physically and mentally, emotionally and spiritually, energetically, socially, sexually, familially, creatively and professionally, all aspects of your life, all areas, elements, levels, integrating into every cell and every system, particularly flowing and filling that place where the inner critic used to reside. You might breathe this energy in. Filling, fulfilling. So Olivia is receiving her entire body, a golden rainbow-like vapor. Lovely. And Jessica, what's happening as you dialogue a little deeper or feel with this helper? Is there something higher level of higher consciousness that wants to come? Or is there a reason for this dynamic? We'll be curious about that. So receiving and receiving and receiving this transmission, this new operating system that's supportive, productive, constructive, and taking all the time you need until that feels complete. Receiving and receiving and receiving. from this ally, this helper. This compassionate or wise or strong inner guide. Excellent. And what form does that higher source take, Jessica? See if you can sense or feel or imagine how you experience that higher source. And how does it want to transmit into your body to really receive it? Might be a sense of felt experience. So don't worry about the family path, Steve. We'll just receive on the levels that we can receive. And trust that your own psyche knows where this energy wants to flow. And if it can't go into certain areas, that's totally fine. I'm going to trust the process. Doesn't need to make any sense. It's my favorite phrase. So Jessica, just allowing yourself to receive from this higher source, however you sense or feel or imagine it. And once that feels complete, bringing all of this back with you into your body, your mind, your emotions, and your energy system in present time. And take all the time you need and feel free to open your eyes when you feel ready. You might stretch a bit, grab a drink of water, whatever your beverage of choice is. And I wonder if you can sense or feel or imagine calling this ally or helper or higher source into the room with you right now. Notice where you experience them in relation to your body. Are they behind you, beside you, in front of you, above you, or within you? And how does it feel to have them here in this way? And I want you to notice how easily and naturally you were able to make that connection, and that this energy is always available to you, whether you're alone or with others, whether you're busy or at rest. Sunita can feel it on the left and gets goosebumps. And this is a new operating system that the old inner critic has been transformed or dissolved. And very much like turning a cucumber into a pickle, this experience cannot be reversed. This is, in my experience, a permanent shift. Just like when your phone gets updated, you don't get to unupdate it.